Welcome, everybody, to this session of the RSG webinar series. Today's topic is small flock herd advanced reproduction. This session is really designed for those of you that maybe have a smaller breeding operation, that you're just getting started, or maybe you're brand new to considering some advanced technologies in reproduction. We have Dr. Tad Thompson, the CEO and founder of Reproduction Specialty Group, with us here as our guest expert. And we're on the reprospecialty.com website right now. There are a number of resources available here on the website that you can check out as well. We'll reference these again here towards the end of the session. But Dr. Tad, I want to, first of all, have you explain to our audience just the initial process of kind of what you need to be thinking about in terms of goals and what you want to achieve by taking advantage of some of these advanced reproduction technologies.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Welcome everybody, and greatly appreciate you tuning in here. And I think initially we need to just start to think about how do we formulate a plan, and what does that plan need to look like? And so, if you're looking at a flock size of 20 to 30 animals, or 50 or 100, whatever the flock size is, starting to put some strategic ideas behind it. And so, are we talking? Are we wanting to try to maintain our numbers? Are we trying to expand numbers? And so, kind of how do we approach it that way? And then looking a little bit at what what are our goals? Are we trying to start to create a program that's competitive locally at county shows? Are we looking at trying to create a program that's more competitive at a state show or a national level? Or are we wanting to establish ourselves as a bigger market seller, things of that nature? And so I think just starting to formulate the plan as to what you guys want to accomplish is the first step of that. And then how do we integrate whether it's artificial insemination, embryo transfer, IVF, how do we integrate that into that plan?
Very good. So let's talk about what is out there, what is available to a small flock or small goat herd breeder that they might be thinking about in terms of taking advantage of some of these technologies. What are some of the services available, and then what's some of the science behind it?
Sure. Yeah, and so I think all those technologies can be available. One of the best ways to get started into it is with the artificial insemination program. So initially, it's a lower financial investment. You can get into it at any level. So you can get into it with one animal or 10 animals or 5 animals, however that looks in your program. Is a much easier entry point into the technologies, and because there is a learning curve to it. And so when it gets into, how do we program these animals, how do we prep those animals, the learning curve is kind of cumulative. And so we start off with the AI program. I think is a great entry point. You can purchase frozen semen on a per straw basis. So that again is easier versus trying to purchase fresh cooled semen, which is a half jump or a whole jump, which would entail 15 to 30 animals. So there's just different levels of it, but AI is probably one of the best entry levels.
When we talk about AI in small ruminants, LAI is the common term, I think, for laparoscopic AI.
Mhm.
Why do we not, or why are we able to do vaginal insemination like they do in beef cattle? And do you see that maybe as an option anytime in the future?
Sure. It's a great question, very common question. And the first step is, of course, physical size changes the technique in what we can accomplish in cattle versus small ruminants. And then we need to split small ruminants into sheep and goats. And then we take the goats first and we split that into meat goats versus dairy goats. And so if you look at it from a dairy goat standpoint, the transcervical artificial insemination is effective, and it is somewhat relatively well used. Between sheep and goats, you have two different cervical anatomies, and so the cervix is different in those two species. Within goats, you have a little bit more of a ring structure like you do in cattle. And so it's actually easier to transverse the cervix with your AI rod to get the semen into the uterus. The challenge you have in the boar goats is you typically have a higher body fat content. The pelvis maybe isn't as open or as easy to get access to the cervix. In sheep, you tend to have a cervix that's more, it's kind of like maybe the best way to explain it is kind of a piece of cloth that you crumple up into a tube, and then you're trying to get through this tube, and you get caught up in the folds of the tissue, and it's a much more difficult process to get through that cervix. So uh, the short answer is transcervical AI can occur in both those species. However, when we look at the research behind the AI work in sheep, your time for the procedure, your success rate, and the utilization of the semen into the uterus is much higher with laparoscopic AI. And so, over the last 40 years, this research started at the University of Sydney over 40 years ago, and so through all that work, it's still proven out to be the best and most efficient way to laparoscopically AI sheep. However, if you go to the dairy goat side of it, there is still a viable option to do transcervical there.
Let's, since we're on this topic, let's talk about those success rates and kind of the differences there. If somebody new just thinking about getting into this, what can they expect in terms of doing a laparoscopic AI? Or I think a common term we hear on the goat side is maybe splash breeding. I know you've done a video here on our YouTube channel about that. What can they expect in terms of results if they decide to go down this path?
Sure. Yeah, and as I share some of these numbers, I think the qualifier to it is, this is data over uh, um, a 12-month calendar year, which accounts for tens of thousands of procedures. And so averages are averages for a reason. And no matter what science you're looking at, repeatability and volume of the data set increases confidence in that number. So if we're talking about 10,000 laparoscopic AIs versus 10, the confidence in that percentage of conception rate is greater in a 10,000 head data set. So as we talk about these numbers, that's specifically what we'll refer to as the larger data set. So with that, we start to look a little bit about semen options. And so if we're using a sire that we collect fresh and we process it and inseminate those ewes immediately with fresh semen that has extender with it, that's going to be your highest conception rate. You should be able to push up into the 80, potentially even 90% conception rates. When you get into a fresh cooled sample, those are ejaculates that have been collected somewhere else, FedExed in, shipped in, and then utilized maybe 24 to 48 hours after collection. It still can be a very good product. Your conception rates are going to tend to slide down just a little bit, maybe 5 to 10% less. You could probably land in that 70 to 80% range, somewhere in there. And again, occasionally down to 65, right? It just depends on so many of these other factors. But then when you get into frozen semen, frozen and fresh cooled should be very comparable, somewhere in that 65% range, give or take, 5% either way is very commonly reported. That being said, if you have 10 animals and use fresh cooled semen, your results could be 10 for 10, or they could be 0 for 10, based on the factors of synchronization, animal health, seasonality, all those type of things. So the percentages I share are really over a large subset of data.
And what about the splash breeding if we are doing that in the goat side? What kind of data do you have to share on that?
Yeah, and we're seeing really good success there. We have several clients who run large numbers, specifically on the boar goat side, collecting. We've trained them how to collect and process their own bucks. So we've been able to coach them along that, and then they do the splash breeding, and the splash breeding occurs generally 3, sometimes 4 splashes over that 24 to 36 hour period of time. And with good quality semen and does that are synchronized or in heat properly, we're seeing very good results as in that 70, could be in that 70% ballpark as well.
Okay. I know you've got some slides to share with us for those that may be just getting started or unfamiliar with kind of the science and the biology behind um, some of these techniques and just the animals themselves. Like, what are some of the factors that are important to understand as a breeder before you kind of enter this space of doing some advanced reproduction work?
Yeah, I think the first point to kind of delve into this a little deeper is when when you've hired someone to do an artificial insemination or embryo transfer or any of these advanced technologies, that service is happening at one point in time. So it's happening on one day or maybe over the course of a week, but it's very specific in time. And that animal is 365 days a year, that animal still is doing the other things that it's supposed to be doing. And so the insemination or the breeding process is a very point in time. And the success and failure of that one day is really has a lot of impact from the other 365 4 days of the year that we need to address. And so it's really important to remember that a successful operation breeding program is a year-round job. And I think sometimes we kind of might glaze over that a little bit. So we wanted to spend just a minute there. And so the first slide I'm pulling up here specifically looks at the body condition score of the animals. And so as we look at a population, we look at a herd, we look at a flock, this is one of the easiest ways to evaluate where you're at. And so what is our body condition score? So that's referring to fat. It's kind of a health indication. We can also look at eye color for the FAMACHA score from a parasite load standpoint. Those are all really important um, tools to have and learn early on in order to know how to better manage your flock. And so at this point, I would probably just reference we will have the production guide that's getting reprinted for 2026 available soon. It's a free download from the website, and it goes through kind of what I've classified as the phases of production for sheep and goats and how you can start to manage those in your flock. So pick that up as a reference. In this segment, we don't have quite enough time to delve into all the phases of production. But what I wanted to point out of this chart that's coming up here now is at the bottom of our hierarchy of needs are genetics. And so as you start to get into breeding sheep and goats, remembering what your genetic pool is also very important. So if you have take an Australian white hair sheep versus a Rambouillet Western ewe, their genetics and their ability to breed out of season is completely different. Or if you take a Spanish doe out of Texas versus an Alpine full blood dairy goat, again, their seasonality is going to be significantly different in how they naturally cycle. So genetics is a key component to understanding how do we manage that set of genetics for success. As we go up the pyramid, there at the bottom are just kind of the basics of life, so nutrition, clean water, all those type of things that we have to make sure we have in order just to live. And so water is the number one nutrient in any of our programs and diet, and it's often most easily overlooked. And so as we move up the pyramid, this is where we start to look at the environmental impacts. And so how's your facility set up? Do you have good air quality? Can you manage the heat and humidity during the summer or the extreme colds of the winter? So those are the areas where that environmental component plays into. And then at the top of our pyramid, at the peak, that's where we have reproduction. And so as we look at how do we most successfully accomplish reproduction, and we think about the investment in our genetics, we think about the investment in semen and all those kind of things, we really need to focus on those bottom components of the pyramid first and foremost in order for that to be successful at the top. And again, as we mentioned earlier, kind of what are your goals to get us started? At this point, we'll turn a little bit to maybe a little bit of a biology lesson here for us. As we look at this slide, I just wanted to point out a few indications. Can you see my pointer on the screen
Yeah,
there?
yeah,
Okay,
sure
perfect.
can.
So as this dotted line goes up, that is what's called progesterone, and that is what's maintaining the pregnancy and maintaining the animal from not having a heat cycle. This is also uh, why we use what's called a cedar. The cedar is a natural releasing progesterone source, or it's natural progesterone, but it's releasing it exogenously into the animal to kind of stop them from having the cycle. And so this is what's key to synchronization of their cycle to do the timed insemination process. So progesterone here on the top, that's going to be where we get what we get from our cedar application. And you see this little spike here called PGF2 alpha. That is where we're utilizing estromate or lutelyse to provide that increase in PGF2 alpha. And what that does is it helps to decrease that progesterone level that's naturally being produced in their body. And then when we use PG600 or PMSG, that's where we're getting this LH surge for having them actually have estrus or standing heat, if you will. So that just gives you a little bit of background on the programming component. This is just a very simplistic program. And so on day one or day zero, sorry, that's where the cedar would go in. So we're creating some progesterone. 12 days later, we're giving a prostaglandin to reduce their endogenous or their internal progesterone. And then on day 14, when we remove the cedar and give us one of these products to stimulate the cycle, um, you could see how that hormone cycle goes back up with estrogen, which is what induces the animal to stand and receive the male for breeding. And then that's how we determine the timing for the insemination. With embryo transfer, we'll just jump to that here real quick. These are just a couple pictures of a collection of 6-day-old embryos that we're getting ready to transfer. That synchronization protocol is very similar with a cedar estromate, except we add in this FSH product, which the brand is called Folitropin, and that is basically pure FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and that is what is used to super stimulate or generate more oocytes follicular activity to increase the number of recovered embryos. And then the cedar is removed with insemination to follow. And then 6 days later is when the surgical embryo recovery occurs. This is just a quick picture that kind of shows the uterine horns here on either side. There's 2 uterine horns. The blue Foley catheter is in place. There's a balloon inside the uterus here. The syringe has complete flush media, which washes the inside of the uterus out, collected into the search dish for embryo processing and evaluation. Then once those embryos are processed, they're graded, washed, then they're transferred into a recipient or a surrogate ewe or doe in order to carry those babies to term. Jump into another technology. This is in vitro fertilization. Many people, I'm sure, have heard about this in the human world. It's been around for a very long time. The cattle industry has utilized it for a very long time. However, we're just in recent years finally gotten developed that technology on the small ruminants to start to have some more predictable success. And so it's a laparoscopically produced collection. So we have 3 ports to aspirate or collect the unfertilized oocytes, which are the ones here in the middle with the kind of cloud around them. Those are cumulus cells. And then once they start to divide, that's the picture to the right. These are two-cell embryos. And then as they grow the next 6 days, we end up with the fully expanded embryos in the lower picture. So that's a quick reference to in vitro fertilization. Just did something here to the screen.
So as we look
Yeah.
at these procedures, Dr. Tad, I know we get a lot of common questions, particularly from people that are newer to this. You had up on the pyramid there the hierarchy of the things that those animals need to survive. Stress was in there, and I think we get a lot of questions about how stressful are these procedures on the animals. Things like what should we consider for hauling into a host site to get them perhaps bred? What's too far to travel? Those types of things. You mentioned heat. What are some of those factors, and what are kind of the guidelines, I guess, or parameters around those?
Yeah, that's a great topic, and and ultimately the stress, the 2 weeks prior and the 2 weeks after the actual AI procedure are more detrimental than stress that occurs the day of. We see heat stress coming into it, or heat humidity combination, how that impacts the quality of the oocyte or the egg. And then post procedure is where we get that environmental stress that impacts how those fetuses can actually implant into the uterus. And so, really, either side of the procedure day, that is stress that's probably, not probably, it is significantly more detrimental than than the day of the procedure. So interestingly enough, we need to do some work around cortisol levels on surgery days. Early on, when I was still in vet school, we did some procedure, or we did a trial looking at prostaglandin release on procedure day, and it's a very high spike, but it drops very rapidly. And so the stress that's occurred on the procedure day has a very minimal impact to the success or failure of their conception. Some of the things that increase the stress and risk of the procedures, if they're not fully pulled off feed and water for 24 hours, can really negatively impact the success. The rumen is full of feed and water that the ruminant has, a gas bubble, has a fibrous mat, fluid, and feed below. And within 24 hours, it's still consuming that water and that feed. And so while we're withholding feed and water from them, they're actually not off feed and water because they're just consuming what's into their intestinal tract and their rumen. So that's really quite important. Transporting doesn't seem to be an issue. Once we have clients who can very commonly transport 3 to 4 hours to a host site, very, very commonly. And in some instances, they actually receive a higher conception rate than the farmer who's hosting the day. So
Mm,
it's kind of interesting to look at that. We haven't run any statistics on it, but there seems to be an impact of it. But if you think about, if you show livestock and you put a set of ewe lambs on a trailer and you start hauling them around, showing them, a lot of times they'll start to cycle. So
yeah.
there seems to be actually some benefit maybe to transporting along the way.
So let's talk for a moment. Another common question, you mentioned the use of teaser animals in this kind of process. How important is that if you're a small flock, a small goat herd? Maybe you don't want to have that extra teaser animal around. Is it critical to success or not?
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a measured success question. It is recommended, it's highly recommended to have a teaser ram. What the teaser effect improves on is that 1 to 3% success, and so it helps to give us some indicators as to are these animals cycling properly? Did they cycle too early? Did they cycle too late? And it helps us to group them up into a tighter window. And so the male effect has been shown over the years as very important and impactful, and probably even more so impactful in our goats and our goat programs than it is even in our sheep programs. So while I can say, do you have to have a teaser? No, you don't have to have one. Is it preferred and beneficial? It is.
Okay. Along those same lines, too, I think a lot of folks hear a buzzword, melatonin. Do I need to give my animals that implant or that product? What's your thoughts on the use of melatonin in advanced reproduction?
Yeah, I think it's essential actually. And when it's essential is through our summer months. And so we have to remember that sheep and goats are um, genetically seasonally anestrous. And so what that means is back before we started working with any of these technologies, sheep and goats were built over time to get pregnant in the fall of the year. So they're going to get pregnant in September, October, November. And the reason that was they were built that way is so that when they had their babies, it was springtime. The weather was warmer, the grass was greener, the feed sources were greater. So these animals really are not built to lamb in December, January, in the times of the year that we're working for the show stock side of it. So that being said, is if your breeding program is um, targeted at a show period or a show stock period when you need to have them born at a certain time, if you're doing breedings through the summer, which is June, July, August, then melatonin is essential. And the reason why is take it back one step farther to your daylight. And so what is the photo period of the day? And so the longest daylight month of the year is June. And so every year it may fluctuate which day is the longest day of the year, but it's always going to land in June. And and when you look at our programs that come out of the winter and get into the summertime, results start to drop as we get into that June, July, and August period. Has to do with photo period, so decreased in natural melatonin. It also has to relate to increases in environmental temperatures and humidity, and those things start to impact it. So the utilization of melatonin it's a natural product. There's no residual issues. There's no withdrawal to it. It just simply offsets the photo period that we're compensating for during the summer.
Another common question we get from folks starting out is the use of fresh versus frozen semen. And if they go the fresh route and they maybe are visiting with the breeder, they might use the term, would you like to get a full jump or a half jump? Kind of explain the differences between the two products, whether it's fresh or frozen, and then the difference you're going to get whether you're buying a full jump from a breeder or a half jump.
Yeah. And so I think some of it depends on how many animals you're looking at doing. So if you're below 15, then you're certainly going to be better off to look at a frozen semen product. 15 to 30 is really kind of what would be considered a half jump. 30 animals and above would be more what's considered a full jump. Now, and that being said, a full jump or a half jump, you're also reliant on the fact that that sire is going to be collected 24 hours prior. It's going to be shipped across the country, and you have to get to where, or you're going to pick it up, to where
Yeah.
you're going to do the AI work. So some of the words of caution would be making sure you have a backup plan. As we've dealt with a lot of shipping issues over the years, whether it's, it doesn't matter which of the shipping companies it is, they all have great days and they all have failure days. And so if your semen is on a truck that doesn't make it to the site, that is something you have to be cautious of. With your frozen semen product, you can have smaller numbers, guarantee it's there in advance, and so you eliminate some of those worries of the shipping.
So another common question, you brought up a slide showing IVF, touched on it briefly here. I know on February 24th, we have a live Zoom scheduled to just address IVF and questions around it. But just kind of in a summary, I guess, when is that a tool? You mentioned it's kind of relatively newer to the small ruminant industry. What are you seeing in terms of folks that maybe are starting out? Is that something to consider out of the gate, or is it something that's maybe later on in your breeding program?
Yeah, and I think some of that maybe even comes back to how aggressive you're wanting to be in your
Yeah.
program. So IVF is a great tool. It is not a replacement for conventional embryo flushes or a replacement for artificial insemination. You know, it's just a different tool used in a different way. We do see uh, significant seasonal impacts from the IVF process as well. And so when you consider um, collecting these oocytes, growing them in a lab, and transferring them, the quality of that oocyte is better once we get into the natural season of September, October, and November. And so just keep that in mind as you start to look at how IVF can be utilized. I think as a general rule of thumb, IVF is great in some of those younger females that we're getting started with, specifically even in the goat side, on the dairy or on the boar goat side, where we're having maybe these 10, 12-month-old doelings that we can go ahead and speed up the generation interval on. I also think that there's a really good utilization for IVF in the older does or the older animals, the older ewes that maybe their productivity has dropped down. We can kind of bypass some of the issues with the uterus, or if there's something going on there that the animals are having trouble getting good quality embryos to transfer period. So there's some utilization there. Probably the third place that I would mention that some of the clients are utilizing IVF is, again, it can be repeated every 3 weeks versus every 6 weeks in embryo transfer, and so you can be a little more aggressive with the collection of the oocytes and transfer of embryos. You do, on average, get a few less embryos per IVF aspiration, and so if you take sheep, for example, if you're doing a conventional MOET or multiple ovulation embryo transfer, the 40-year average in sheep is 6 good embryos per flush surgery. In comparatively in an IVF situation, if you have a 35, so if you collect 10 oocytes, you're going to see on average about 35% of those develop to embryos. So you're looking at about a 3.5 average on that. So comparatively, in a 6 week period, you can do 2 IVFs to 2 different sires and generate 6 to 7 embryos. And with embryo MOET or conventional embryo transfer, in a 6 week period, you can generate about 6 embryos per one sire. And so there's some advantages on either side of that, from one sire to 2 sires. But total embryos out, you're looking at about the same number. The other scenario is you could go um, every 3 weeks with your IVF, and then throw a conventional flush in there as well. So we have clients utilizing it in different ways.
Very good. So as I did mention, you can find more information about IVF on our website, reprospecialty.com. And then we do have an upcoming Zoom meeting at 8 p.m. Eastern on February 24th. We'll dive into that topic quite a bit deeper, I know, at that point. As we wrap up here, Dr. Tad, any other advice or information that you think is important for maybe a smaller producer or someone that's just considering these types of procedures for their breeding program?
Yeah, I think starting early, ask a lot of questions, and qualify the source of your information. So as you start to ask these questions, just make sure that it's a reliable source of information and that it is accurate. But the more people you talk to, you can start to create that learning curve of understanding. And so start early, ask a lot of questions, and just let us know how we can help.
Sounds good. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we do have a lot of resources, including like a gestation calculator. If you're just curious, if I breed on a certain date, when will those lambs be born or those kids be on the ground? That can help you through that process. Dr. Tad also mentioned our production phase management guide. A new version of that is getting ready to be released here shortly. If you're looking for host sites across the U.S., there's a location for that as well. There's a map with a few of our larger host sites, and there'll be more of these added for 2026. And there's also a place where you can request more information or to get on the schedule with RSG. We also work with a lot of other veterinarians and clinics throughout the country, and there's a lot of great places. If it's not a site or location that we'll be at, we're happy to help resource and share information that way as well. So make sure you check out those resources and our online catalog if you are getting ready to purchase some semen or looking for options for your sheep or goat semen. There is an online catalog where you can purchase the frozen semen that way as well on our website at reprospecialty.com. And we have a new version of this getting ready to be released here in about the next 60 days. So lots of good information there on the website. Thank you for tuning in and watching this video with us. If you have other questions, please reach out through the website or give us a call here at RSG. We'd be happy to help support your program. Any final thoughts, Dr. Ted?
No, just greatly appreciate everybody and supporting the industry, and look forward to seeing you down the road.
All right. Thanks, everyone.